will be starting momentarily. We're ready to go. Joe Leech and Taylor Hanna are here. They're going to take us through stacking. I'm Dédé Wilson from FODMAP Everyday. Robin Jaffin, my business partner, is managing tech. And we just want to point out a few things for you. If you look at the bottom of your screen, hopefully right in the middle, at least it's in the middle on my screen, you will see something that says polls and quizzes right in the bottom of the black area of your screen. If you click on that, you will actually see 3 polls. Oh, a bunch of you have found them. So that's great. We would love it if you could take the time to answer those questions. Those will help us for future content development and question answering, because all of us are here for all of you. We want to help all of you get as healthy and pain-free as possible. So, all right. So I will just say again, I'm Dédé Wilson of FODMAP Everyday. We do webinars like this every once in a while, which is so exciting because we get to bring you some of our partners and friends in the digestive health world who have really important things to say. Today's topic is on stacking, which we know is really confusing for a lot of people. Now, maybe some of you have joined us because you know Joe Leech and his team, including Taylor. They are digestive health experts, dietitians, a team of dietitians. They've helped over 10,000 people get their lives back and have given them help with their digestive issues. So if you did not know Diet versus Disease before, that's their website, please be sure to check them out after our seminar. Again, this is being recorded. You'll be able to view it afterwards. If you have a question, you can write something over in the chat and we will hope to get to it during the hour. And I'm going to turn it over to Joe and Taylor, and they're going to take us through FODMAP stacking.
Hello, thank you, Dédé. Thank you, Robin. Joe and I are so excited to be here. I'm going to kick us off by starting with discussing FODMAP stacking. Let me get my screen shared and presenting. Okay. Can everybody see this full screen or up? Perfect. Yes. So today, of course, you're here to learn about FODMAP stacking, and we are going to chat about what FODMAP stacking is. We're going to talk a little bit about the different FODMAP groups. It's a really important baseline information to be a little bit more familiar with stacking once we get into some of the examples. We'll talk about some of my top tips and our team's top tips for preventing stacking. We'll talk about what to do if you have stacked. It's not going to be the end all be all. Don't worry, we can always have some strategies to help us out. And then Joe will dive into some of the next steps as well. As mentioned, if you have questions throughout, please pop them in the chat box. Put your hand up as well. There's a little hand up button in your bottom piece as well, if you are familiar with that part of Zoom. And I am happy to dive into that, but we'll also have a question period at the end. Oops, we went a little too far. Okay, so first, in terms of the different FODMAP groups, I'm going to ask you guys before I actually move on to the next slide, what are the different FODMAP groups? Are you familiar with them? And I'm looking for 6 specifically, so I'll pull up my chat too. Oh, I keep giving it away. What are the different FODMAP groups, and are you familiar with which ones are out there? I'll start with 1, lactose. That tends to be a common one that people know. Are there any other ones that, let's see, I see fructans, yeah, that's one, fructans. Any other ones that you guys are familiar with? Okay, disaccharides, fructose. Yeah, so FODMAPs do stand for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. And so the different FODMAP groups that you'll hear me talking about today during the presentation, and I heard a few of them. So fructans, this one's a little bit unique in the sense that if we look at it under a microscope, all of the different chain lengths are a little bit different. Fructose, that's one, and that someone had mentioned that one. GOs, GOS, or galacto-oligosaccharides, you'll often hear it referred to a little bit differently depending on where you are. The polyols, so mannitol and sorbitol, and lactose. And so this is important when we're talking about stacking, as we want to know what the different FODMAP compounds are within the foods that we are consuming and how that they stack together or add up together. So the next thing, how do we know what FODMAP compounds are present in which foods? So one of the tools we really like to use are different apps. The reason why is when we are at home, we will not know what is in an apple or maybe what's in a banana. That information is not on labels typically. And so we often will refer to some of the different apps that are out there to help support knowing what compounds are in food. Is anyone familiar with the FODMAP Friendly or the Monash app? You can put your answer in the chat box perhaps. But a lot of the times these are, yes, I see some yeses popping up. Awesome. And so people often ask me, why are they sometimes a little bit different? So I want to tell you a little bit about how this testing occurs before we dive into stacking. So with these different labs, what they're doing is they're going to test foods multiple times and then find an average. Now, foods aren't exactly the same FODMAP content every single time. And so there's going to be a little bit of variance, and that's where sometimes you'll see those differences in both the apps, but they're both trustworthy, and it just helps give us a little bit more information. If you're noticing symptoms, we can kind of experiment a little bit and look at both of the apps perhaps and see what are the different FODMAP amounts.
Yeah, I know. Again, don't see her there yet. Want to be muted.
Tyler, you're just muted now. Hi everyone, by the way. I'm Jed.
Hello.
You were muted, or I think.
Okay. Well, I don't know when I was cut off, but I will jump back to, was it when I started chatting about the differences in the app? I'm gonna think, okay.
Yeah, you just cut off just very recently.
Oh, okay, perfect. So in terms of why there are differences is, of course, produce is a little bit different. The ripeness will tend to shift the FODMAP content, handling, selective growing, and lots of you may have noticed recently that some foods have been actually retested and the FODMAP amounts changed. It's not that it was incorrect previously, but it's just that food will shift and change as well as growing changes, as we selectively grow, that type of thing. And I see Dédé put a article in the chat box, so that's a great one to check out if you want a little bit more information on that. So now for the exciting thing and why we're all here. FODMAP stacking. So stacking refers to when those FODMAP compounds I had mentioned accumulate or stack up in our digestive tract and cause symptoms. Symptoms will vary depending on the person, whether you have IBS-D, diarrhea, IBS-C, constipation, or IBS-M mixed. So what we often hear from people is, it can't be that food. I eat it and I haven't got symptoms before. But sometimes we might eat a food and it may not cause us symptoms if we're below this threshold. But if we eat a higher portion, we might reach that tipping point, which might result in, say, that diarrhea or constipation. Another type of stacking that we will see is if we're eating it fairly regularly, so we're not allowing those compounds to fully digest. So we're eating a little bit, not fully digested, so it stacks up a little bit more, and then maybe on that fourth day or that fourth meal, we're now experiencing symptoms. What I often hear from clients in these scenarios is, Taylor, there's no way it's that food. I've just ate it for 4 days and I felt great, or the last 4 meals and I felt great. There's no way it's that food. And then when we start to pull it out or tease and start to tease away kind of those little pieces and determine a threshold, we can start to figure out that it's not that the food's bad, but we have to stay within our threshold or the portion that we're able to digest well without having those symptoms. So I have an example here.
Could I just interject one thing? I think that, if people are feeling overwhelmed already, I think that this is the perfect point to explain. This is why it's so important to work with a registered dietitian. You do not have to do this alone. The dietitians, like the dietitians on your teams, are there to hold your hands, and they're going to walk you through all of this part of the diet that you're talking about.
Yes, thank you. That's such a good point, especially since you're right. Lots of times we either feel like we are alone, or this is when we start to hear people are pulling everything out there. They only want to eat one food, like maybe just rice or just potatoes, because they're so nervous about stacking. And we don't want to villainize all foods or create food fears. And so that's where definitely working with someone who's very familiar with FODMAPs or specializes in digestive health can really help support that. So you don't have to try to sort out all of those pieces, because it is really complex and it is a lot of work, and it's taken a lot of time for even myself to become many years to become very, very comfortable with just looking at some of our clients' tracking or their typical eating habits to really be able to, that just pops out at me as well. So really wonderful point. Thank you. So I wanted to pull up a few examples as well to help sort through this, and it's not changing my slides now. Let's see. There we go. So an example I wanted to use was chocolate. I'm a big chocolate fan. I don't know if anybody else is. So this is going to be milk chocolate for this example, which will be lactose, will be the FODMAP compound we're talking about. With dark chocolate, we might be looking at fructans, but we're looking at lactose here in this milk chocolate. So let's say we are looking for a nice treat to have after supper, I don't know. And so every evening we're having, or maybe after lunch and supper, we're having a little bit of chocolate. So those 4 squares falls within a low lactose portion. Again, it might vary a little bit. FODMAP friendly, I believe it's 4 squares, and Monash, I think it might be 2 or 3. But again, depends on the chocolate bar you're having, the size of the chocolate squares, and grams as well. But we're not experiencing symptoms fully. Again, it's not fully digested, and now at supper time we have another one, and now this is when we're starting to really experience symptoms. But we might assume it's not due to the chocolate, since for the first few days or first few meals we've had it, we had no symptoms. So we might have it one more time, and now we're really experiencing symptoms. And so that's, again, a good example of single food stacking. Where it starts to get complex is that lots of foods share the same FODMAP compounds, but are within different families. So I'm going to pull up one more example here. Oh, I thought I had one more. Just one second here. I'm going to actually close out because I do have one more example I wanted to bring up first. Perfect. So another example that I wanted to bring up is related to different foods that have a same compound. So these little guys are Brussels sprouts. I know that they're not realistic size since beets are not smaller than them, but Brussels sprouts and beets. So Brussels sprouts are going to contain fructans, as are beets. Again, for Brussels sprouts with the FODMAP friendly app, 4 is going to be within a low FODMAP, 4 or less low FODMAP portion. And with Monash, it's going to be 4 or above is high FODMAP. So here we're having just 2 little Brussels sprouts, and we're also having beets. So let's say this is our lunch, we're having Brussels sprouts and a few beets, and supper, we're having Brussels sprouts and a few beets. So now in terms of the fructan content, we might have a few Brussels sprouts, no symptoms, it's a low FODMAP portion, we're staying within what the app recommends. We're having a few slices of beet, which again is within a low FODMAP portion, no symptoms. We have the same portions for supper, but it tips us over because we have stacked on top of each other. Even though all of those meals, we've had a low FODMAP portion. So it's important to remember, low FODMAP does not mean no FODMAP. It also doesn't mean that we're for sure going to have symptoms if we have them together. Everyone's threshold is a little bit different, but that's where finding our unique thresholds are really important as well. And again, this is very confusing, so I don't expect people to have to get it right off the bat. You will be able to have this recording as well. And so I see someone put a question in, is there a list of foods under each FODMAP type? I've been looking for this, but having a hard time. It's a really good question, Karen, and I would actually recommend the apps because they're gonna be the most up to date. So a lot of the lists can be out of date, especially if you find a lot of the ones online, and I'm not super familiar with a lot that are under each specific FODMAP category. I'm not sure if you're an app person or if maybe anybody else on has a good recommendation for a list that is under each FODMAP type. But the apps definitely do have the foods broken down by each FODMAP category.
I think we do get this question every now and then, and there is not a good available list. I think one of the things to think about, is it Karen that asked, believe it or not, sometimes different types of FODMAPs can be discovered in the same foods depending on when they're tested. So even if you found a list that said this food contains fructans and this food does not, it could be that tested at another time with a different batch of food, that could be a different result. So I think that's probably one of the reasons we don't find those lists.
It says the Monash app doesn't have this. So within the Monash app, when you search a food, I'm not sure if you're meaning in terms of breaking down by compound, they should have little dots that are red, yellow, or green under each of the different FODMAP groups. But maybe I'm misunderstanding that question.
What they're looking for, Taylor, is they want to find a resource that says fructans, and then it lists all the foods or sorbitol, and here's all the foods that have sorbitol, as opposed to starting with the food and being able to look up the food and then seeing what the breakdown is. But we have not found that list.
Yes, correct. Thank you. And I do see a question as well that says, is this per day or per meal? And this is a really good question. I'm actually going to talk about it on the next slide because it is such a good question that I get often, and I'm jumping around a little bit, but I'm going to pull up this one next. So in terms of FODMAPs, they can stack. A lot of the times you'll hear 4 to 6 hours, and this is going to be for typical motility. However, we often know that if you're having IBS symptoms, you don't have typical motility. And what I mean by motility is movement through our digestive tract. So for some individuals with, say, IBS-C or IBS constipation, we know your motility is going to be slowed. So to back up a little bit, FODMAPs, they break down, or when they're reacting, is in our colon. So ideally, it's all going to digest nicely in our small intestine before it moves to our colon. With IBS and different digestive concerns, typically this is not occurring properly or as expected, which ends up pulling either that fluid in or causing this fermentation and gas in our colon. And everything starts to kind of build up within our colon. And sometimes it feels like it's in our upper GI tract, but it's that transverse colon that wraps around right by our stomach that puts a lot of pressure up. And within that, if we have constipation or slowed motility, it can actually be above that 24-hour mark. It's also important to remember, although digestion is occurring within perhaps a 4 to 6 hour window, it might not be fully digested. And so that's why we often recommend even within 24 hours and a little bit longer for individuals with constipation. The 24-hour mark gives us our body a little bit more time to allow those foods to digest without that kind of half digestion and then stacking on top of it right away. And so that was a really good question as well. Yes, have you ever had a safe food that started to trigger symptoms later on? This is exactly what we're talking about, those safe foods that are stacking. And when you're working with one of us or your dietitian, for example, what we can do is we can help to determine what your window is too, because it is pretty unique for each individual, and your window of stacking might change depending on your symptoms as well. Okay. And then I like to put this reminder in there too, because sometimes there are other gut irritants that are also contributing to symptoms. So if you're experiencing symptoms and you're pretty sure you haven't stacked, your dietitian's pretty sure you haven't stacked too, we also want to look at, is there any other gut irritants outside of FODMAPs that potentially contributed to your symptoms or stacked? A really, really common one I see are these fatty foods. However, it can also occur with some of the other ones. But before we move on, we're going to do another poll with a few questions. the first one, it should pop up for you, but the first one, would consuming 1 teaspoon of honey, carrots, and cucumbers together be considered stacking? These are really tricky questions, but we will see. And then true or false, the FODMAP content of a food does not change and is always the same. I'll give that just 1 second and then we'll go through it. Oh, I love seeing everybody answering some of these. Okay, I'll give it another 10 seconds and then I will, oh, go ahead, Dédé.
Yeah, no, it's just great seeing it in live time. I love it.
Oh, I know, I do too. It's great.
And just while everyone's doing the poll, just to circle back to the FODMAP, a list of FODMAPs by group of FODMAPs and listing the food. Feel like we used to have that, but it updates all the time. That it, like Monash and everyone update their data all the time, and it becomes out of date really fast. The only sort of workaround, Taylor, I don't know if you ever recommend this, but if like using the filters in the Monash app and then actually sort of like doing it backwards. So if you put, there's a question mark in the top right of the Monash app, and there's using the filters at the bottom, which explains how they work. And it's like a little slideshow that Monash made in the app that explains them. And you can like fiddle around with what you tolerate or don't. And you could even, for example, pretend you don't tolerate anything, but that you do tolerate one, like fructose. If that's the one you want to find out, hey, which foods are high in fructose? And then when you use that filter, it's actually going to show you all those foods. So that's sort of one little workaround, if that makes sense. You can fiddle with the filter in the app.
Yes, actually, that's a really good point. And I haven't recommended in that app actually. But yes, then it would only pull up the foods with fructose, for example. Yeah, so you could see which ones, yeah.
Then you get your sort of list by food category.
Yes, yeah.
And then I notice there's like lots of questions here, but maybe we'll try and get to them when you think it's appropriate, Taylor, like to have a pause or Dédé, or we can do them at the end as well, guys.
Yes, I'm just going to look through quickly and see if there's any. I might save a few of these for the end. How long does digestion from each meal take? That's a really good question. I think that was Mercedes, and that one is going to be fairly individual to each person, again, based on their motility or movement through digestive tract. Again, average or typical would be 4 to 6 hours, but we do know that individuals with IBS don't have typical digestion times typically. Again, especially if you have IBS-D, IBS-C, or IBS-M or mixed as well. We see the largest extremes in motility with our IBS-C constipation clients. So that's going to be a tough one for us to answer, but I did want to chat about that one. Okay, let's go through these stacking questions. So would consuming 1 teaspoon of honey, carrots, and cucumbers together be considered stacking? So I'll walk you through kind of my thought process when going through this, or what I would typically recommend a client do if they're kind of putting together a meal. Maybe they're putting together some type of salad with a honey dressing in it. First, I would say let's look up honey and see if honey contains any FODMAPs, and it does contain fructose. So let's say the recipe originally called for 2 tablespoons in a 1 portion. We'd reduce that portion to say 1 teaspoon, that's low FODMAP, or swap honey to maple syrup. In this case, the client loves honey, so we have a 1 teaspoon portion of honey, that's low FODMAP. Now we'd look up carrots. Does carrots have any FODMAPs? It does not, and it does not have fructose, which could stack together, at least not in high amounts. Again, all foods will vary a little bit. And then cucumbers would be another good example of a food that's fairly low FODMAP or does not contain those FODMAPs. And so stacking there would not occur. So it's a no, but I'm going to say it could be a yes depending on the portion of honey. So it is a bit of a trick question, but in this case, it is a no, and that would be using again, those portions without any other ingredients. I know sometimes dressings and whatnot will have some sneaky ingredients in it. So I love seeing kind of the mixed answers there. And I should also mention that if you are consuming a food that contains some FODMAPs, there is a chance that you can consume low FODMAP portions without having to completely avoid it. And you might even be consuming slightly higher ones. And if you're not reacting, you don't necessarily have to eliminate during the elimination phase, but we would recommend reducing it during the reintroduction phase as well. Okay, so true or false, the FODMAP content of a food does not change and is always the same. So this is false. The FODMAP content of a food can change, whether, again, during its even one banana's lifespan, from green to brown will change the FODMAP content. Even strawberries, as their life goes on, their fructose amount changes. And when we retest foods even years apart, the averages will be quite different. Those FODMAP amounts are just a snapshot of that moment with that food. And we look at the averages as the potential, the FODMAP potential of that food. It's not an exact measurement. And with that potential, we look for trends with people's symptoms. But thank you for participating in that poll. That was fun as well. We have one more at the end, but I did want to go through the stacking again, just with some of the other compounds. I often see them with fatty foods, alcohol, spicy food, caffeine, histamine, or other food chemicals such as salicylates. When we say food chemicals, we're not necessarily referring to I think sometimes people think of like labs with like compounds that shouldn't be in foods or anything like that. They're naturally occurring food chemicals that we typically are looking for as well, that can sometimes cause symptoms. Now, I don't want people to eliminate all of these, but I would recommend perhaps tracking your foods for a while and your symptoms and seeing if you notice any trends or certain amounts that cause symptoms for you. So how to avoid stacking, and I'm curious if anybody else has tips. If you do, please put them in the chat box. But number one is spacing out our meals. So regular meals and snacks, as opposed to kind of grazing all day, can help prevent or minimize our risk of stacking. We do know that FODMAPs can stack amongst multiple meals, so we do have to still be a little bit cautious. Eating more foods very low in FODMAPs or even FODMAP free. Carrots and cucumbers are one of the examples I used in the last poll, but that can be a really good one in the sense that you don't have to worry about stacking with those ones. And so checking for some of those foods that are fairly low or FODMAP free. Again, I say that lightly in the sense that it doesn't necessarily mean those foods are completely FODMAP free, but they are low enough that we don't have to worry a lot of those foods about stacking. Avoid having too much fruit, especially in the same meal. That's probably one of the most common foods that are food groups that I see stacked is going to be fruit. They tend to be really high FODMAP as well and have multiple FODMAPs within the food. A good example would be blackberries and raspberries and blueberries blended into a smoothie. That will typically be fairly high FODMAP. Raspberries have fructans, blueberries have fructans, and blackberries have sorbitol. And so when we put all of them together, we have all these FODMAPs that are blended together and tend to be pretty high. And so our reactions can sometimes be pretty significant. Focus on variety. And so yes, even if you find a meal that you find you tolerate really well, I still encourage that variety, not only from a nutritional perspective, so you get different vitamins and minerals, but also to help prevent that variety or the stacking with the variety. And so I saw someone in the chat box put in, what about leftovers? With leftovers, I often recommend people even freeze them, or if you keep them in the fridge and you leave even a day in between, lots of leftovers will be fine in the fridge for multiple days, but freezing portions is a great way to help prevent that stacking as well. And then the last one is probably one of the most important in my opinion, and this is learning your unique thresholds. There are going to be some FODMAP categories you do not need to worry about FODMAP stacking with because your threshold is very high, or you might not have an intolerance or reaction to that category at all. And so determining which categories you react to in what amounts is going to be crucial for determining which ones you're going to react to, which ones you need to be more cognizant of. And the nice thing is once you determine which ones you react to and which ones you don't, you have a lot more variety and you have a lot more, or a feeling of a lot more control a lot of the times of your symptoms, because you can actively decide if you're wanting to tip a little bit over for this meal to have maybe a little bit of bloating, whereas maybe with fructose, you get a ton of diarrhea and that one's not worth it for you. And so you can start to be more aware of what compounds cause what symptoms and what amounts. And this one, you can do it on your own. It can be really challenging. And so that's where I do recommend working with a dietitian to help support you in determining those unique thresholds for each compound as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do it yourself, but it has to be methodical. And I think that's what's really difficult for people. And we get that. And a registered dietitian can really help you stay on track. And the other thing about the unique thresholds that we always like to caution people is that, like somebody was recommending in the chat, a supplement that their doctor recommended, and they said, this is fantastic. When you go on social media, we just caution you that that's not the place to get your medical diagnosis. That's not the place to make a decision about adding a supplement or a medication. Every single one of us is unique. Our GI tracts are unique. And so, one person might be able to eat half an apple. Another person might be able to eat a quarter. Someone else might be able to eat an apple 3 times a day. And that's not unusual. So, just be careful in terms of how you're absorbing information. All of you are unique, and a registered dietitian could help you keep on track with what you need.
Yes, that's a really good point. And the other, actually, that reminds me, the other piece I should mention is our thresholds change over time. So once we determine your thresholds, we put you on a bit of a maintenance plan, and then we also send you with information on how to retest, especially since typically we see lots of clients that contact us maybe a year after working with us, and they will mention that their thresholds have really increased, especially in certain areas. And we can kind of push those a little bit, again, with unique individualized strategies for each person. But yes, your thresholds can change. That will be based on your digestive health, your stress levels, your hormones. There's so many factors and variables that play a role that it's important to also reassess your thresholds as well. Okay, so let's say you are thinking back to breakfast this morning and you had a fruit smoothie and you stacked. So you're now sitting there nervous about what is going to happen. Well, what to do if you've stacked. My first go-to is easier said than done, but don't panic. As we know, you often hear me, if you've watched some of our videos in the past, say our gut-brain axis also plays a large role, or our fight or flight response plays a role in our symptoms too. It's a really great learning opportunity, especially if we do develop potential symptoms in terms of looking at what compound we may have reacted to. Do not jump to conclusions. The reason I say this is sometimes I see clients say, well, one time I reacted to a smoothie, so I never ate any of the foods in there ever again. And then eventually, as we start to continue to do this, we have nothing left to eat, or we feel like we have nothing left to eat. And so it's really important to really determine exactly what was there and looking for those trends and what may have caused those exact symptoms. Peppermint tea, as long as it doesn't trigger GERD for you or reflux, it's a great anti-spasmodic. It can be really calming for our digestive tract. You can also have digestive peppermint capsules that are enteric coated. These ones can sometimes be more effective for people. Fluid is a great one, not coconut water. That's a really high FODMAP, one that I often see people drinking when they're in flare-ups. I think it maybe might be one of those Facebook trends that circulated, but not coconut water, just regular fluid, hot packs or baths, some gentle movement or stretching. Don't feel like you need to go run a marathon or anything, but just some gentle movement can be helpful. And I'm curious, does anybody else have any flare-up strategies that they find really helpful when they notice that they're either in a flare-up or that they have symptoms? Yeah, bowel massage, that's a really great one. Some people call it the ILU massage. That can be a really fabulous one as well. And there's some great pelvic floor physios that have some good videos on YouTube around bowel massage and doing it properly. So that's a really good one too. Thank you, Mary. But yes, do not panic. And I know it's easier said than done, but there are a few things. Yes, meditation or breath work in a quiet room. If anyone's familiar with gut-directed meditation, I love that one. Yeah, gut-directed hypnotherapy, a beautiful one during flare-up. There's a good app that we often will recommend called Nirva to our clients. Insight Timer also has some digestive health meditations. That's great too. And Dédé says, we have a video. Perfect. Yes, lying flat on my back, that can sometimes help as well. And so having a bit of a toolkit for when you're in a flare-up is fabulous as well. And keep your eye out on the chat box because I think Dédé will put a video in there in a moment as well. Okay, so I am going to hand it over to Joe and he is going to go through the next few slides for us here.
Cool. And before I do anything, Dédé, do you want to interject? Do we have another like poll or anything we want to do first?
I'm Robin. Where are we with the polls? Are we going to have anything else right now? No poll until the end, she says. So just take it away, Joe.
Okay. I will hijack the screen and I'm just going to be like, honestly, I think 3 minutes maybe, and then we'll get to all your questions. That sounds good. Let me just share my screen. To make sure I share the right one. Can you see this? Go.
Yes.
So just very quickly, this is just going to be like, hey, if you're interested in getting some help with this. So if you feel like you're not improving with your issues, okay, or the stacking concept feels quite overwhelming, it is really difficult to learn concepts like this in 30 minutes, right? When you don't have the interaction. You could consider, let's just say, working with our dietitian team. Yes, we have a delay. So we've worked with 2,000 plus clients, like one-to-one, and they're from all around the world, different places, IBS, SIBO, IBD, diverticular disease, other food intolerances, food chemical intolerance, and more. And I just wanted to show you quickly some examples of the video testimonials we have. We have Teju as well in the chat, and I genuinely didn't know she was going to attend, but she's been super helpful. I've been reading the answers that she's giving, so it makes me feel like we've done a good job with her for sure. But we do video testimonials. You can find them on our website. The reason being, like, I want it to be sincere. I want you to see, like, this is real people just like you. They're real stories, where they come from, what the issue was, where they are now. And so obviously there's a lot of people who don't want to be on the internet about their digestive issues, but there's some people who are happy to do that because they know it helps with people to feel confident about online services. Because I know this is like, we're doing this online and it's kind of new, the whole telehealth space, but we do these videos so you can sort of get an idea. And you can see that they can't be faked. Okay, so you can see those on our website. I'm sorry, I don't know how many I put there. Also, we have Trustpilot. Okay, so if you're just unsure as well, you can go to Diet vs. Disease Trustpilot. It's like an independent review website. At the moment, we have 139 reviews, 4.7 stars. So yeah, you can't please everyone, unfortunately. Almost though. So what do I put here? Yeah, so if you're struggling with gut issues for a long time, and it's got to the point where you're like, this is too long, I'm not getting anywhere, take us up on this offer to resolve things properly with dietitian guidance. So what we're going to do is a free call with you guys to see if we can help you. So, oh yeah, we're currently over 400 members, active members. We do it with an application, a call application. We don't have that many spots. Genuinely, now we're hiring. We're hiring another dietitian, maybe two. So if you go on our social media or anything, you might see those ads. So we're hoping to expand our capacity. But look, if you're here and you are motivated to get some one-to-one help, consider us for sure. So the steps forward before we're about to go to Q&A, and I think you should definitely stick around for Q&A. That's where we can provide you the most value, okay? You can use this link below to book a time, and you can speak on a call with either myself or one of our experts on the team. dietversusdisease.com/book. I don't know if you can tap this or anything, but don't tap it. Just write it down or type it in later, dietversusdisease.com/book. We'll send an email out anyway to make sure you have the link. Again, on the call, we're just going to see if we can help you. If we can't, we can refer you on, because there aren't many situations where dietitian help is not necessarily what you need or not what you need now. If we can help you, we can explain you the different options that we have to work with you, because it's very personalized and one-to-one. We're really flexible with what we can do there for people. So
before we jump to the Q&A, I just want to say two things. So the two things that we hear from people all the time who are not working with a dietitian yet is they say, I can't afford it. And then they say, I can't find one. In terms of not being able to find one, we're bringing them to you. Joe and his team work globally. You don't have to leave your house. So that part is taken care of. In terms of, not being able to afford it, we see people, I was talking with someone last week, and we determined that last year she probably spent about $800 on supplements that ended up not working, buying foods that she thought were going to help fix and cure her symptoms, which didn't. Plus, she spent that year being in pain and not getting any better. And actually, we have seen that working with a dietitian is the most economical and straight line to gaining relief. So just want to put that out there. I mean, we hear this every single day. So, this is definitely an opportunity to take advantage of these guys in the Q&A, and then follow up afterwards, hopefully, to at least take advantage of the free phone call.
Yeah, for sure. So if you're thinking of some questions now, you guys, this is your chance. Taylor in particular is super smart and working with clients every day, so she's up to date. She knows what's up. So if you got a question, write it down in the chat. Robin, I don't know when you wanted to do the final poll. If you want to do it after Q&A, hopefully, we should be able to get through everyone in the next 15 minutes, all the questions, I hope.
Okay, and I see that poll has just popped up, which is great, but I will also go through the chat box because I would love to answer some of the questions that came up. So Gwen asked, for clarification, is FODMAP stacking eating more than one FODMAP in a single meal? Yes, so stacking would be eating more than one FODMAP within a single meal or within multiple meals within your digestion period. That digestion period is quite unique to people. So I usually just start with a blanket 24 hours. I think Manash recommends 4 to 8 hours, but I do find that that's sometimes not quite enough for our clients with IBS, especially IBS-C or constipation with slowed motility as well. Someone asked about histamine. So histamines is outside of FODMAPs. It's a different intolerance, but sometimes individuals have a histamine or a natural food chemical intolerance. Stacking does apply within those intolerances as well, but we don't recommend people do low FODMAP, low histamine, low salicylate at the same time. You will have nothing to eat, and it'll be very challenging to do. What I would recommend is getting assessed to actually see which elimination is going to be most valuable for you, whether it be low FODMAP, low histamine, low salicylate, from there, but the same stacking concept applies for histamine intolerance as well.
And I just want to add, so, hopefully when you get diagnosed by a GI, they've screened you for celiac, they've looked into diverticulitis, endometriosis comes up. I mean, there are things that your GI is going to screen you for. Histamine is not something that's usually screened. So how do you know that histamine is an issue? If you're working with an RD and you've started the low FODMAP diet and symptoms are breaking through, different things are happening, that's exactly what the RD can help you with. Whereas if you were doing it on your own, you might just think, oh, I'm not doing this FODMAP thing right, or the FODMAP thing isn't working for me, and maybe it's not, because something else is going on, and you need the medical direction of a registered dietitian to help you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And yeah, so many people are so hard on themselves when they're putting in so much effort, and it's usually not something they're doing wrong. It might just be that we're maybe on the wrong path or something like that too. Absolutely. I definitely see a lot of people that put in a lot of work, and they're not, it's not them that's being bad. A lot of times I hear that from people. I see a question here. I drink about 2 cups of caffeine in the form of black coffee and an equal amount of decaf coffee throughout the day. Is this too much? Really great question. And I would say it depends on the person and their threshold. And again, this is where I can't answer without knowing a little bit more of your own clinical picture and how your digestive tract is maybe influenced by caffeine. Some people's are not, other people's are. And for some people, even 1 cup of coffee is too much. Other people can have 4 cups, maybe 2 cups of caffeine and decaf without it causing an issue. But you could always start by kind of tracking it or experimenting with it a little bit and just see if it makes a difference. Make sure you only change 1 variable at a time. If you change everything, you won't actually know what's working and what's not. So that's, again, that methodical testing and challenging and kind of determining as well. Someone here says, a little off topic, but the results of the first poll. I was diagnosed at the very beginning of the pandemic and assigned a dietitian. I had a grand total of 2 video visits. Am I actually working with my ID, or should I be in more frequent contact? Love this question, because before I worked with Diet versus Disease, I worked in a clinical setting where that sounds very familiar to how I practiced as well when I worked in hospital and with a GI, where we would have a couple of visits max with a client. To be honest, that is not enough time to see success a lot of the time. I'm really lucky now with our team. We actually get to work with our clients and meet with them weekly, if not every 2 weeks. So we are touching base with them 2 to 4 times a month and working with them for 4 months. And so we meet with them very regularly. The reason why is because if you are, say, stacking, or there's a supplement, your vitamin C contains sorbitol, and we wait a whole month to really figure that out, it's so much slower. And if we can really get in and change those and tweak as we go, we can be really efficient and effective at getting you feeling better much quicker. And I know that there's a lot of different people that practice differently, but I really find the weekly or bi-weekly visits to be the most effective within digestive health as well. So I would, again, it's going to be individual, but I would recommend more frequent contact for sure.
Yeah, and can I jump in quickly?
Please do.
And Michelle, with a question, like, if you're asking, like, am I working with this person? If you have to ask that question, no, then you're not. You definitely shouldn't have to ask that. So I think it's pretty clear, but that's not like, that's the conventional system, and that's why we started the company and doing what we're doing, because it's too slow. The wait lists are too long to even get started, and then you see someone for, we speak with them for 30 minutes, 45 minutes in the first consult, and we're supposed to learn everything about you, what your goals are, your nutrition, what you eat, your meal plan, whatever, and then give you a plan as well, teach you about FODMAPs, assuming it is low FODMAP you should even be doing, and then we'll see you in a couple months, if you're lucky. It can never work, because you're essentially on your own as soon as you walk out the door. And what we're doing, we've just removed that, and online allows us to do it. So we should be leveraging this weekend. You can do appointments from your own home. You can do them in the evening or out of hours, whatever suits you. You can message your dietitian, if you think of a question like that, and you're not even having a consultation, and get an answer and not have to wait. You can speak with your peers, because like, at least in our group, we've got 400 other ladies who have similar issues, or they ask questions that you might get value from, or you can speak with them and discuss certain things. So that would be then working with your RD, in my opinion.
There's a question about prebiotics and probiotics. One of the questions is just in general. Someone says, Catherine says, She feels better when she eats them. And then Michelle asked, how do prebiotics and probiotics affect stacking?
Such a great question. So in terms of prebiotics and probiotics, for supplementation, that's going to be very individual. The strain, the amount, when you take it is going to be dependent on your symptoms. And a lot of the times, pre and probiotic supplements will contain inulin, which is a high FODMAP component. And so definitely checking your supplements if you are taking them. And to be honest, during the elimination phase and the reintroduction, I often pull out a lot of those supplements and add them back in during the re-challenge and maintenance phase. And during that maintenance phase, when we add some of those in, we are doing so short term and typically for a specific reason or symptom. A lot of the times I see clients come in and they're taking tons and tons and tons of different supplements when lots of them are actually contributing to symptoms as opposed to helping their symptoms. And I know I sound a little bit like a broken record when I say it really depends on your digestion, but it is very, very true. And if something works really well for your, say, neighbor or your friend or your auntie, it doesn't mean it's going to be a good fit for your unique kind of gut fingerprint or gut microbiome and the symptoms you're experiencing. And so now how they affect stacking is if they are containing, a lot of times I see either sorbitol or inulin. If they do contain a little bit of either of those, they're already going to stack you up part of the way. And so then if you even have a low FODMAP portion of a food with fructans, for example, if your supplement has inulin, you're going to be reaching your tipping point, even though you're at a green or low FODMAP portion. And so that's where some of those can impact stacking as well. They can also shift our motility or movement. So this can change our digestion window or stacking window. One example would be a Lactobacillus reuteri can sometimes increase motility, really helpful in constipation at times. This doesn't mean if you have constipation, you should go out and get this. Again, you have to ask your medical professional. But when it increases our motility or frequency of bowel movements, that can reduce how long you have to worry about stacking for. So that would be another example there. And then the other thing I would mention is once you're in maintenance phase and you know your thresholds, sometimes if we're strategically utilizing some of these supplements, we can increase your threshold a little bit. So then you have more room for more FODMAP stacking before you have symptoms, if that makes sense. I hope that answers your question, Michelle.
And it also just to clarify, something that we often point out to people is that the purpose of the elimination phase and the challenge phase is to determine your sensitivity to FODMAPs. If you take probiotics and they're helping you, it could be clouding your reaction to FODMAPs. And that's what you're trying to determine at that time. So that's why, as Taylor said, she tends to remove them at that portion of the diet. Because remember, the diet has 3 phases, because those early phases, you're trying to assess your reactions to FODMAPs. Someone asked about endometriosis. That, I mentioned it. They wanted to know, is there a connection between IBS and endometriosis? They had endo as a young adult and now have IBS in their 60s.
Yes, we definitely see a correlation between endometriosis and IBS and a lot of overlap. We also see that with endometriosis, there is sometimes that increased gut hypersensitivity because of our nervous system being heightened there. So our body's trying to protect us when there's any type of discomfort, anything like that. And that's part of our body's protective response, is that fight or flight response. And although it doesn't feel protective, we often see an overlap that develops, especially as individuals have endometriosis flares. Sometimes working with even pelvic floor physiotherapists can be really helpful, and gut-directed meditations can be really helpful there. But we also see shifts in gut microbiome within some of these populations, whether it be endometriosis, PCOS. This can also be hormonal related. So our hormones and hormone fluctuations can also contribute to changes in our gut microbiome, motility, sensitivities as well. And so there's definitely some overlap. There's actually, I know that Joe, our Diet versus Disease, has an article on that too. I'll see if I can pull that up as well, and maybe we can send it out in our email because there is a little bit of overlap. I'm not sure if FODMAP Everyday has a blog on endometriosis and PCOS, or sorry, endometriosis and IBS.
We're working on one. We do have one on PCOS.
Yes. Okay. Maybe it's the PCOS one I was thinking of because I knew you guys had one or the other. But yes, there is overlap. There's a few factors that can play a role. Definitely hormones, definitely motility, and definitely that hypersensitivity in our abdominal area and some of our muscles. When our muscles become tightened in certain areas, other parts of our body try to counteract. If we have, say, a sprained ankle, sometimes we then get a sore hip on the other side from trying to counteract with it as well. And that can happen within our digestive tract, our pelvic floor, our abdominal or back muscles as well. I am not a physiotherapist, but in terms of some of the ones I've worked with, that's how they explain it often. Let's see if there's...
I just posted a timing article. I sent it to someone personally by mistake. It was meant to be general. Someone asked, why do some foods cause symptoms very quickly after eating and others only cause symptoms after several hours?
Fabulous. And so that's a good question. And again, this will be a little bit unique for individuals depending on their motility. Sometimes it can also be dependent on what type of sensitivity that an individual has. FODMAP reactions are typically in our colon. However, sometimes if you have, say, other diagnoses, this can occur higher up in our digestive tract. A common example would be like a small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. Those FODMAP reactions will actually happen typically in our smaller intestine or higher up in our digestive tract. Sometimes we even have, there's a really interesting study on this. I forget the exact terminology they use, but it's almost a learned response. So if our body knows that we're going to react to something, we have a learned response to these as well. That can also occur sometimes if we, for example, see something with garlic. So we see a French onion soup has onions and garlic. We know we react to garlic and onion, and then we eat that, and then we have a reaction that can also occur. Sometimes it's actually that we're reacting not to FODMAPs, but to something else, and that can occur higher in our digestive tract. Maybe the acidity of a food is reacting in our stomach and causing us GERD symptoms or heartburn symptoms as well. And again, it'll depend on our motility and how quickly things are moving through us. But I see that Dédé also put a article in there. I guess the other thing I should mention is sometimes we're actually we're reacting right after a meal, but we're actually reacting to something we ate the meal before. But that current meal is pushing things through our digestive tract into the colon where it's then reacting. So we feel like we're reacting to that meal that we just ate, but we're actually reacting to something earlier that we had, or maybe a few meals before as well. That's a really common one that I see as people, no, I for sure reacted to something in this meal. But then when we look at the meal before, or maybe even the meal the night before, we see that there was high FODMAP compounds. And we then know that eating the most recent meal just moved things through the digestive tract. So that's another really common reason I see as well.
Okay, well, we have one more question real quick. Someone wants to know if it's okay to take Imodium preventively before they go out to eat. And we have about 1 minute for that.
Great question. I would say yes, if that's one of your strategies, you definitely can. I, however, would then say that would not be some of the data I would use during your elimination or reintroduction phase, because it's going to throw off how your body's actually responding. I also recognize that people don't always want to experiment when they're going out to eat and have symptoms, that type of thing. And so there is a bit of a balance in finding how you're going to manage symptoms and still live your life. I also don't recommend taking preventative Imodium every maybe day or every meal for the rest of your life. I definitely would want us to sort out some of those symptoms, but I also acknowledge that we have lives and we are going to go out to eat and we're going to have birthdays and important things in life too. And so for some individuals, that's a really great strategy to still partake in some of those pieces. We would just not count that data set in our elimination or reintroduction kind of analysis from a dietitian perspective. I hope that answers that question.
Well, that was great. Wow, this was a jam-packed hour. So much information. Thank you so much, Joe, and so thank you so much, Taylor. So, I hope everybody got something out of this. And it's baby steps, right? If you feel like, whoa, I can remember like 2 things, that's okay. We recorded it. Please do reach out to Diet versus Disease fodmap.com/book. You can type that into your own web browser. Take advantage of their questionnaire with their meet and greet with you to establish whether they can help you or not. We do encourage that everybody work with a dietitian because we know it will get you to where you want to be, symptom-free, most efficiently. So thank you, everybody. We're at the end of the hour. We will be following up with resources. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.